5 weeks into the college football season, and the Pretenders are really starting to show themselves. 10 ranked teams upset this past weekend, and Chris Hummer here to break it all down with me with his winners and losers. Chris, I just mentioned the Pretenders, but we're going to start on the positive side with the Contenders. Some of them surprised us a little bit. So who's number one on your winners list?
Yeah, you have to start with Alabama, which is back to number one on the AP poll because of the performance it had against Arkansas. And Alabama was forced to play this weekend. Arkansas pushed that game to a 5-point margin in the second half. Their Heisman Trophy winner, Bryce Young, was out with the shoulder sprain, and Alabama could have easily lost that game. Instead, we saw Alabama respond, which is what the great teams do. They respond in those situations. And I think the key thing for Alabama moving forward is they might have found something on the ground that they've lacked early this season. Obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs popped off 2 70-yard plus runs, and that really helps your yards per carry average. But Alabama needs to be able to run the ball this year. They haven't been able to do so well. We saw flashes of that in the second half when Alabama had to move the ball that way. If Alabama can run that way the rest of the year, and if Bryce Young returns healthy, this offense could be what we envisioned it to be, especially with some younger receivers emerging as well.
By the way, that AC joint sprain for Bryce Young not considered serious. Nick Saban saying he's day-to-day. Your next winner on the list, we're staying in the SEC West.
Yeah, I think you have to go to Ole Miss. And this is a bit about Lane Kiffin showing a different side of himself. I think we've always thought about Lane as a bit of a mad offensive scientist. He's going to win throwing the ball. He's going to win with pace. But Ole Miss has a different formula this year. They beat Kentucky this weekend, and it was because of their run game and their defense. Ole Miss didn't even have all its horses. Zach Evans was banged up, so they had to go with Quayshawn Judkins at running back, the true freshman, and he had an outstanding showing. Jackson Dart did enough offensively for that defense to carry them. Ole Miss reinvented that unit through the portal this offseason. 2 years ago, they were one of the worst units in the FBS. Now they're one of the best, and they showed that against Kentucky, holding Will Levis in a potentially explosive Kentucky passing offense. And check, and I think that's a really good sign for Ole Miss moving forward as they try to compete in the SEC West.
Yeah, Kiffin's defense making the difference. Who would have thought? The Rebels holding their last 10 opponents to 21 or fewer points. Okay, your last winner on the list, another playoff contender.
Yeah, you have to look at Clemson. They won against NC State over the weekend, coming off a victory against Wake Forest. You can check both of those boxes off the regular season schedule. Other than Florida State, the ACC does not present a lot of other tests for Clemson the rest of the way. So they've taken care of the difficult part of their schedule, which automatically makes them a winner. But when you consider that Clemson won this game without its best interior defender in Brian Bazee, and with its best player in the secondary, Andrew Makuba, ejected early for targeting, you really liked what you saw from Clemson this weekend. Plus, DJ Uiagalelei is playing the best football of his career. We saw a different side to him over the weekend. He had to run more often than ever. He wasn't able to rely on those deep shots, the kind of playmaking ability he has to stretch the field. He had to be a little more patient, and we saw him do so successfully. If Clemson can continue this formula the rest of the year, I think they're a legitimate national title contender.
DJU playing with a newfound confidence. Meanwhile, all the confidence is draining out of Sooners Nation. Chris, your first loser on the list.
Yeah, this one had to hurt, especially when you consider there's a Riley brother on the sideline for TCU. Obviously, Lincoln's brother Garrett was their offensive coordinator. And this was just rough all around for Oklahoma. It's only the 8th time in Sooners history they've allowed more than 55 points. The 31-point margin of defeat is I think, the largest for the program since 2014. Oklahoma is getting gashed defensively. And to make everything worse, Dillon Gabriel, the star quarterback, got hurt in the game. That's the one position Oklahoma had absolutely no chance to avoid a disaster if he gets hurt. They have no depth behind them. And you're heading into the tougher part of the Big 12 stretch, starting with Texas and the Red River Shootout this weekend. So it is not a good thing right now for Oklahoma to be where it's sitting. And I have a hard time seeing them rally from this slow start.
Losing to Lincoln Riley's brother, man, that is just rubbing salt in the wound. Okay, who's next on the losers list?
Yeah, I think you have to go to Wisconsin. Wisconsin has been a really steady force in college football for a decade now. They've been a consistent presence thanks to a great defense and an elite rushing attack. But we've seen both of those units crack this year. And Wisconsin's had no answers through the air. Graham Mertz gave away that game early with 2 costly interceptions against Illinois. And Wisconsin ended up losing to Illinois at home for the first time since 2002. Wisconsin's in a really tough place as a program right now. I think we thought of them as the most reliable team in the Big Ten West for forever, but we're really starting to see cracks show in the foundation in Madison, and I'm really not sure what we're going to see from them moving forward.
Okay, and last on the losers list, we go to an ACC team of very confusing defeats.
Yeah, Jeff Collins got fired from Georgia Tech less than a week ago. And you know what Georgia Tech did this weekend? They beat a top 25 team in Pittsburgh. That is an embarrassing performance by the Pittsburgh Panthers. There's no other way to look at it. This is a game that should have been a layup for Pittsburgh, a team that harbors legitimate ACC hopes. Instead, they're now 0-1 in ACC play with the toughest games on their schedule ahead. I think this is a game, when you look back at the end of the season, if Pittsburgh ends up not winning the ACC Coastal, that you'll remember. This is a bad loss, and we always seem to see this out of Pittsburgh every year, just a head-scratching loss. We saw it last year with them losing to Western Michigan despite this really strong run they had in the ACC. So this is just yet another example of a confusing loss by Pat Marzuzzi and that Pitt squad, and I think it really could come back to harm them at the end of the year.
All right, winners and losers of Week 5. Thank you, Chris, for your time. And for all your college football news, check us out at 247sports.com.